Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share yet another update on my experience with the Sony CyberShot DSC-RX10. This is the latest addition to the RX lineup of cameras from Sony. Of course, a CyberShot branded camera, which means it is a point-and-shoot consumer camera, but because it's part of the RX family, it is aimed at enthusiasts as well as pros. For pros, definitely a secondary option, in my opinion, but that varies by individual needs. And that applies to all of the RX cameras in the lineup, but the 10 is specifically versatile in ways that none of the RX other family members are, and that's what makes it so appealing in my opinion. It's quite pricey at $1,300, and I've covered it extensively already. My last update was thorough, to say the least, but today's update is about just more experience with it and, quite frankly, enjoyment, because this is a camera that I think is in many ways getting both praise as well as criticism. Its price point brings on a lot of criticism with regard to the ability to essentially buy into an interchangeable lens system and pick up a really solid piece of glass rather than committing to what appears to be the king of bridge cameras right now. And I will say there's no question I've dubbed it the king of bridge cameras, and it is. It looks like it has a mega zoom. It doesn't. You're looking at an 8.3 times optical zoom, but nonetheless with clear image, which basically is a form of cropping, not digital zoom. That's yet another feature within the camera, and this is one of the most heavily feature-laden bridge cameras that I've ever seen, and not just about what it puts forth on paper, but also what it actually has internally. That 1-inch sensor that is also in the RX100 Mark II, rear illuminated, quite frankly best in class, and really does blur the line with Sony's other interchangeable lens brand, the NEX brand, which has now become part of the Alpha lineup. And that's something I want to make clear. This is a CyberShot camera, as I mentioned, an RX camera, and Sony has tried to make it clear, or in their opinion, reduce confusion by consolidating their brands into CyberShot, what we're looking at here, and Alpha. Alpha, basically all of the interchangeable lens bodies that they make, mirrorless and otherwise, and of course CyberShot, all of the consumer-oriented cameras. But what's really interesting about the RX10, especially in my extensive use of it so far, is that I think it does challenge much of Sony's mirrorless APS-C lineup, and that's because it's not in that the 1-inch sensor is able to challenge the APS-C class sensor found in cameras like the NEX6 or the even higher resolution NEX7 or the 5T, and of course the 5000 as well as 6000, the Alpha cameras that are coming out that are no longer NEX branded. But the pairing with this Zeiss T-Star glass that is f2.8 constant really just gives results that I cannot match, especially in auto, which I think is incredibly important to the class of consumer, the actual individual that Sony is after with a $1,300 bridge camera like this. So for all of the people who've been questioning who this device is really aimed at, I think it's clear it's for the person that doesn't want to carry around a gear bag, does not want to have to swap lenses. They like the fact that this camera is completely weather sealed. You're going to get consistent performance, and by that I mean someone who's shooting in auto, which tends to be the case a lot these days with the average consumer who goes out and buys an interchangeable lens camera, the base entry-level model, $600-700, maybe even ponies up the $1,000. Then finds out they've got to spend another $500, maybe even $1,000 to really put proper glass on it. And then if they don't learn and they're just, spending their way to good photography, which doesn't exist, that's not possible, they very quickly find out that that's a never-ending hole. That's what the RX10 fills that gap, because here you've got a complete package that I have to say, as I just mentioned, really does challenge Sony's top of the line, at least current NEX cameras, since the Alphas aren't out yet in terms of the APS-C mirrorless class, just because of this piece of glass, arguably. I won't give credit to the sensor, because even though that 1-inch sensor is fantastic, we all know it doesn't match up to APS-C class performance. But this glass is just unmatched. In fact, you won't find it available in the E-mount class of mount right now. So that sums up performance overall. Now, when it comes to the overall feature set, it's just incredible what you get here. And that's another thing you do not get in Sony's mirrorless lineup at this sort of price point. So the $1,300 price point, which I think is the biggest critique of this camera right now, is a false one in my opinion. It is an expensive camera, but when you look at what it can do in terms of still capability and then video capability to boot, which is really where things get very impressive, Sony has hit a home run here with the RX10, and I think that's part of the reason that we haven't seen any discounting on this camera whatsoever to date. When it initially launched, Adorama, I believe, was unloading these for like 900 and some odd and change as open box, and I don't know what was going on with that. But since then, this camera has stayed firm at retail. The only way to really get it discounted is through Sony Rewards, and that's if you're a credit card holder. Otherwise, no EDU on this, and there's a reason. This is probably one of the best cameras Sony has ever made. And that's for the average consumer and pro alike. And I say that because for pros, this is a very solid backup. Granted, it's not going to give them anywhere near the capability of full frame and depth of field or any of those things that comes with interchangeable, larger sensor size and then complemented by great prime interchangeable lenses. But this overall pairing does deliver such consistency that my rate of keepers overall, especially when you're just running and gunning essentially and shooting off the hip, is just higher than any camera that I've played with in a long, long time. Weight and balance is perfect. That's something I'll be talking about when I compare this to the NEX6 with the 18-200 native E-mount power zoom lens, because that's about as close a comparison as you can get, even though that has a lot more reach than this piece of glass. It still is a valid argument because I think that's something a lot of people are going to be interested in. Boot up time, very quick. Zoom and focus also very fast, and that's what makes this camera great. You've got a readout that will show you your aperture as well as battery life, the number of stills left that you're shooting, your white balance mode. So really nice things here. All laid out cleanly, backlight for that to give you that true digital SLR feel, which is what this body resembles. You've got an aperture ring right here, which you can turn a click mode on and off, so that if you're shooting video, obviously you don't want the sound. If you're shooting, dedicated stills, better, you can actually go through your steps by memory, and feeling the click rather than having to ever actually glance to see where you're at. But it's just great, and of course you can see it actively updating right there as I move the ring right now. So very cool indeed. Correction on that. I'm not in a non-auto mode. Let me go ahead and switch over, and then you will see that we will actually get aperture priority right there. My error. Too into the actual talk here about the quality of this camera, and that's because it really has blown me away. And frankly, my biggest question on this camera has been, the photos that I'm able to achieve with it, could I pull it off with an NEX camera, now Alpha? And of course the answer is yes. In fact, you'll get better images, but you have to pony up a lot more for glass. So this camera is really aimed at that person who wants interchangeable lens-like quality without having to spend interchangeable lens-like investment money. And that's what the RX10 does beautifully. Now, on the video side of things, this sensor also just does incredibly well. It's got direct pixel readout, which means that you're actually getting a clean video reproduction, or as I mentioned, readout from the sensor. Unlike any of Sony's other still cameras right now, hopefully this is something they're going to be doing standard, and that Exmor-R CMOS sensor is really just fantastic. The new Bions X processor and the JPEG engine yield some of the best out of camera images I have ever seen. And I'm talking about without having to take things to Lightroom or any sort of post. And that's who this camera is in large part aimed at. Yes, you can shoot in RAW with it, and that should be there at this price point. But the point is you don't have to, and that's what Sony is trying to do. They're making a camera that really can do everything. The zoom ring can control the zoom, as you can see right here, in real time if you don't want to use the actual zoom toggle. But it is very precise. When recording video, it is quite slow, but that's intentional in order to dampen the motor sound, as well as to deliver a actual professional and smooth zoom that most point-and-shoot cameras unfortunately fall short in delivering. I didn't shut that backlight off, but I should. Dedicated exposure compensation dial, dedicated flash button right here. The flash is probably one of the least impressive parts of this camera, but it is still serviceable. Nothing wrong with it. And more importantly, you've got a multi-interface shoe where you can pop on pretty much any flash you want. But in addition to that, this shoe is going to let you throw on so many different devices. And it's frankly standard everywhere else, so it's nice to see that Sony has really made the multi-interface shoe standard now across all of their top-tier cameras, even within the CyberShot family. And it's not limited to just RX. This is something in the HX lineup as well. HX50V, the soon-to-be 60V, as well as, of course, the 300 and the 400V that's about to succeed it. And that'll allow you to hook up XLR adapters for audio if you want to go wild. This camera does have some very solid audio recording stereo. You can see the microphone array right there. Is it best in class? Not necessarily. It's incredibly sensitive. In fact, I had to turn it down to about 15 dB in order to not pick up the microphone, and frankly, sometimes even breathing. And not because I'm a heavy breather, it's that this thing is just so incredibly sensitive at the 26 dB that it's automatically set to out of the box. It'll pick up, camera movement, in other words, handling, things you don't want it to pick up. And that's why Sony does give you options to go with XLR, or if you want, go ahead and pop open these side bays, which, as I mentioned in my last update, the rubber, the plastic here, is actually more substantial in my opinion than what we get with the A7 and A7R. But the port array is pretty much identical. You're getting that microphone input as well as headphone monitoring jack, and then micro HDMI out, which gives you clean video out, another, I would say, almost pro-grade feature of this RX camera. And then finally, your multi-port for connecting your USB for charging, as well as, I've inverted these. The multi-port is here. This is the micro HDMI out. But the multi-port not only allows you to charge and transfer photos if you choose not to use the Wi-Fi or just pop your SD card out, but it's also used for accessories like the optional remote control that I covered in the past. Camera does have Wi-Fi and NFC. Play Memories application will allow you to control this camera as well as transfer photos to and from iOS and Android devices. Again, given that you've paired it with that Play Memories driven application. It will also be able to send pictures to a computer as well as a television. So pretty much any Wi-Fi device you're able to share images with. This is pretty much standard fare these days, but something I want to point out because it is a feature that for some is actually important. The remote control one is arguably one of the best features when it comes to Wi-Fi. The NFC contact point right here, great for convenience if you have an NFC enabled device, and by device I mean tablet or smartphone. In most cases, clearly a smartphone is going to be the go-to accessory, and by tapping it on the contact, that will instantly launch and pair the Play Memories application, taking over the camera rather than going through the process of having to start up the application. So a little less cumbersome. iOS users, iPhone users don't have that advantage, unfortunately, until Apple brings NFC to their offerings. But beyond that, it's just a great experience. I will be also taking a look at a free Android time-lapse app designed for Sony cameras that right now seems to be, in my opinion, fantastic in early testing. But that's another video altogether. The memory card bay right here also seems more solid than what's on the NEX, on the Alpha 7 or R. I'm not sure why that is. It's just a matter of construction. This camera is made in China. The A7, A7R are both made in Thailand, so different factories, different output. I guess that's what it really comes down to, and engineering and design, of course. Overall, a weighty camera, but in my opinion, very well balanced, especially when compared, as I mentioned before, to carrying any of the E-mount true zoom lenses on the NEX, especially if you're going to start using legacy glass and adapters. So this really is a very versatile camera. I would argue it can replace a system for the majority of users who are not professionals and are really just enthusiasts. But many enthusiasts will still want to stick with their interchangeable lens systems, and I don't blame them, and that's because it does offer a range of flexibility you simply don't get here. The zoom range is limited. I mean, 24 to 200, and keep in mind that's with a 1-inch sensor, so it's not the equivalent of a 24 to 200 on something like an APS-C, which has that 1.5 times crop, or, of course, a full frame. You're not getting a true equivalent in that regard. But when it comes to overall performance, and as I've mentioned throughout the course of this video, manual controls and just the sensor really shining, it does that. And that's not something I can say for a lot of cameras. When I compare it to something like the NEX6, just a quick comparison, I will have a dedicated video for that as well. There's no question, as I mentioned before, more keepers coming out of this camera in auto, and that will make it a success with a broad scope of consumer rather than just the professional market. And again, it's not really geared towards pros, but the video quality, the fact that you can shoot at 1080p, 60p, 20, the AVC HD codec now is aged, it is old, and everyone would like to see it go, and it is going. This is one of the last cameras, I think, that'll utilize it on the high end, and do so in a very clean fashion because of that 5K direct pixel readout. And the no sampling issue is really what makes the video so clean, less artifacts, and probably the best video I've seen from any Sony still or video camera in their history. And that is saying a lot when you can compare something like this to the A7R, which with the right glass I think can outperform this, but the right glass is not a Sony piece right at this present moment. Granted, I haven't gotten the Zeiss zoom yet because of the delays, but the lens here really is the killer app. I mean, the sensor has become a dynamo for Sony because they have employed it in the RX10 as well as the Mark II, and those are great cameras, but none of them have this sort of lens. They do have very fast short zoom lenses, but they're limited. They are pocket cameras. That's what they're meant to be. They do also have articulating displays, which is great, and that makes them even more versatile. Of course, that multi-interface shoe that Sony, again, reminding all of their consumers that they've got more options if they grow beyond what they get out of the box. And that's what's really nice about this camera and all other RX cameras, including the One, which I own and enjoy. And this right now is competing with the One, frankly, for the most enjoyable one for me to shoot with. And that's because even though the One is full frame and so small, the lens on here is just amazing. And it's all in the results. And if you pick one up, I'm sure you will agree, even with some pixel peeping incorporating, the OLED viewfinder is not as high res as what you'll find with the NEX6 or the A7 or A7R, but it is as competent, especially for the class of consumer that they're after. Button layout is solid. It's what you have with all of Sony's cameras, some customizable dials, as well as function buttons. All of your standard playback, delete garbage button there, function. The movie button I mentioned in my last update, I far prefer here than placement on the NEX or now Alpha mirrorless APS-C, as well as Alpha full-frame mirrorless cameras. But overall, just again, such a well-made camera that delivers on performance. And a pleasure to shoot with. It's not too heavy. Battery life is solid with the W series batteries, which are not expensive. You're going to get over 400 shots easily, roughly 40 minutes of video. Keep in mind, video is cut at 29-minute clips, But still, again, this is probably one of the best video cameras out there. And for pros, a very good backup on the video side, even if they never use it for still, just because of all the manual controls that are in play here. And the fact that you've got such a smooth and really, I will say, as close to pro capable piece of glass attached to this camera. From what I've read as well as discussed with associates, this piece of glass on any sort of video camera right now, interchangeable style, would far exceed the entire retail cost of the RX10. And when you look at the video performance, you understand why. You wonder what Sony could really do if they matched up even, obviously larger form glass with this sort of f2.8 constant across the entire range with a larger sensor. And wow, I mean, yes, the form factor would be larger than this, but I think there would definitely be a market for it. So it definitely has direct appeal with the average consumer. It checks every mark you could possibly want to when it comes to manual control as well as actual quality output. And you are paying for it. There's no question about it. But so far, the RX10 is kind of stealing the limelight here, the spotlight from every other camera that I have in my arsenal. And that's because really it does it all. Macro as well, something else I didn't mention. And the focus is also better. And I think a lot of that has to do with Sony's latest Bions X processing going on. The JPEG engine, as I mentioned earlier, out-of-camera stuff is just outrageous. And that leads me to often not feel like I need to shoot in RAW, which is something in a camera this size you frankly wouldn't expect. Something this big, you expect to shoot RAW. And let me remind all of you, there is nothing out there to compete with this camera. Panasonic, which used to be the king of bridge cameras, well, the reign is officially over. So even though this still isn't my full review, because I'm vetting this one thoroughly, I'm keeping it. It's already, if it isn't obvious, a favorite of mine. It really is a legitimate solution for all of you out there who have been trying to find the right camera, buying interchangeable lens systems that really are above and beyond what you might need, and yet you still have the ability to grow here and utilize all of the features as well as manual controls that this camera has to offer. So the RX10, a home run in my opinion, as it also goes down in price since it is already getting a little bit of age here since it launched back at the end of November. It's only going to become a better value. And if this speaks again to anywhere, any direction that Sony is moving with the RX lineup, the RX lineup is really kind of stealing the show, even though they're trying to consolidate and clarify the branding, and they were worried about the NEX brand overshadowing their A-mount brand. I can tell you right now that the RX10, in my opinion, it blurs the line a little bit too much, as I've mentioned throughout this video, with Sony's APS-C mirrorless based lineup of cameras. Of course, it doesn't have the portability of something like the 5R, 5T, can't fit in a pocket with a wide-angle pancake attached to it, prime, but when you talk about what it can deliver, you'd have to spend several $1,000s with the traditional E-mount in order to pull off what this camera does at $1,300 and eventually a discounted price to come. So a lot to like here with the RX10, incredible video, incredible still performance with that, same exact sensor that again is in the RX100 Mark II. It's identical, and Sony's using it because it works so well, and that's really what it's all about. Why do they have to change anything? That rear illumination just gives you even more capability when it comes to ISO and just better low light performance, and that also compensates for the fact that it doesn't have a larger sensor along with that f2.8 lens. So really just they've got it right. Whatever they went to bat with here to create, this is one of those times that innovation has arrived, despite whatever you may have read from anyone else, in my opinion. Again, I can completely recommend this camera, even though this still isn't my full review. I continue to look forward to updating all of you on this camera because it's a very exciting device right now out there, in my opinion. And I'm still surprised by how many people are baffled by it and don't see what this really represents when the majority of the camera market isn't pro or enthusiast, and this will fill that gap for them, granted at an expensive price. It'll last them a really long time. Sony's got a great one here, folks. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them, and of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.